This session on CISO Collective, we will be talking with Logan Daley and his experience as a CISO and working with other CISOs in the industry on how do they approach the risk to business from a cybersecurity perspective. Good to see you again, mate, and thank you so much for joining me again today.
Yeah, no worries.
One of the questions that I'm curious about is if you look at the CISO role over the last year, how much do you think in your environment that changed?
Oh my God, how hasn't it changed? I think it's finally been given the attention it deserves, and I think the main reason for that is we're all forced to earn and learn remotely. While the functionality itself never changed, what did change is the reliance upon that infrastructure and that information and safeguarding everyone's information. So CISOs really had to scramble in order to try to get some policies in place to allow people to work from home, yet without hindering them unduly and still being allowed them to, to be able to learn, to be able to work and securely. Because when you're handling highly sensitive information, it doesn't matter if you're in the office or you're home, the same principles need to apply.
If you look at the role, how do you think that is likely to change over the next year or two?
I think it's going to continue to become more of a front runner. The people that need to make these decisions have to lead. And I think that's a very important role for the CISOs. What needs to happen is the information itself needs to be protected. So whether that's protecting it from a commercial perspective or protecting it from, say, a privacy perspective, I think it's very important. And the CISO role itself is going to become more and more entrenched in that. The role of a CISO in organizations is going to be even more and more important.
And if we look at the threat landscape and the trends that's happening, I mean, one of the components we see is the component from intelligent edges that's busy forming. How do you stay up to date with the latest trends on the landscape and see how that will have an impact?
I think in order to be a very good writer, you have to be a good reader. I look for a lot of independent views, so I do spend a lot of time on platforms such as LinkedIn. More recently, I've been publishing a lot of content on Medium. Of course, I follow some of the traditional social media sites, but key among that is you get the opportunity to link to people and then talk to those people directly. Because oftentimes you can get a lot of things out of a conversation that you don't necessarily get from the nuances of simply reading. Because the written word can be refined and massaged to give a very specific message. But when you have a conversation with an actual person that's sharing their opinions, that tends to be much more genuine and unfiltered. And I think you can draw a lot of information from that. Well, I think coming into a role as a CISO, either somebody that comes into the role or perhaps more commonly a business that's finally establishing a CISO role. So traditionally, if they only had a CIO role, they were kind of lumped in with all the information security elements of it. So they needed that role. So as more organizations tend to adopt a CISO role, I think the first thing is to kind of get a lay of the land and not just understand the technology, but understand the implications of that technology upon handling data. How is it transmitted? How is it stored? How is it used? How is it done securely? Who's got access to that data? Why do they have access to that sort of data? So that's probably one of the key challenges is familiarize yourself with the role, with the systems and the implications, and not treating all data the same way. So three of the big challenges that someone have to look at is, okay, what's our current status? So really having that visibility and then to get a good handle on the environment, because if anything, it's far too complex. If you've got too many systems that have too many layers, just don't work well with each other, that leads to a lack of visibility, and a lack of visibility can create human error, and that causes all kinds of problems in terms of information protection. So understanding their current state is probably one of the main things they need to do. The second challenge is probably trying to collapse the stack. And by that, I mean, reduce the amount of different types of technologies and vendors and agendas and that sort of thing. It's not necessarily about getting rid of all of one vendor product and simply using another. It's probably about making sure that whatever you're using tends to work well together. So for example, if I was to say, we need to get rid of all of our product A, product B, product C, and product D because we're going to standardize the product D, well, perhaps there's some value in those first four products that you're trying to take out. So look at it more from a functionality perspective rather than, say, an actual label, because we all get the shiny lights and flashing, status indicators and dashboards and colors and infographics, and I think we've all had enough of those. At the core of it, it just needs to function. And the third challenge I'd probably say is make sure that you align both your technical and your administrative strategies. So technology is great. It does exactly what we want it to do. You set it up, you configure it, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, but it all comes down to it just does what it's told to do. But then you need to have that administrative level of processes over the top of it to say, okay, I'm going to control how I bring this person into my environment, how they have access to stuff, and then what happens whenever they leave the environment. So it's that people process, environment, technology. People needs to sit at the top. Everything else just falls into place. So managing your resources, getting your current state of the land, and managing the process is probably the main areas that focus on.